everyone, and welcome to History with Hiccup. Today we'll be discussing the causes of the French Revolution and giving a brief overview of the events that took place during the revolution itself. To put it simply, the French Revolution was when a bunch of dirty French peasants went sicko mode on the nobility. Okay, that's a gross oversimplification, but that's essentially it. The French Revolution, also known as the Revolution of 1789, had five main causes. These causes are widely believed to be the estate system, absolutism, Enlightenment ideas, food shortages, and the American Revolution. What the hell are those, I hear you asking? Don't worry, I got you covered. The estate system was a class system similar to the caste system in India. The populace was divided into three estates based off birth. This was not a fun class system, like in your favorite RPG. Instead, the third estate pulled all the weight that the first and second estate left behind for them. The first estate was the clergy, which ranged from priests to bishops. The second estate was the nobility. Both of these estates got out of paying taxes, like Jeff Bezos, and his wife said that the third estate carried a lot of extra weight. The third estate was everyone else, which ranged from a commoner to the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie were the rich commoners, so anyone who was not of noble birth but still successful, so think a big business kind of person. This estate system leads well into the second point, absolutism. Absolutism is the belief in an absolute monarchy, which means that the king has absolute power. Get it? Absolutism, absolute power. The king essentially believed that his power came from God, and thus could not be questioned. The king at the time of the revolution was King Louis XVI, who was, as the kids would call him, a wiener. He allowed his opinions to be swayed by the nobility, and because of this, many Enlightenment ideas were not implemented. Speaking of Enlightenment ideas, which ideas influenced the revolution? I'm glad you asked, as that makes for an excellent segue into the next topic. To make it simple, three words inspired the French people. Liberty, equality, and fraternity was the people's mantra. Reason, individualism, and skepticism were becoming more highly valued. The social contract theory, an idea created by Thomas Hobbes, gave the French enough reason to overthrow their monarch. The social contract theory basically stated that if humanity lives according to a contract that outlines moral and political rules of behavior, then we could all live morally because we want to, instead of doing so out of fear of divine punishment. A punishment that everyone is afraid of, however, is starvation. Old Louis had deregulated the grain market, which resulted in greatly increased bread prices. That, combined with several poor harvests, led to serious food shortages. The shortages got so bad that the people led a small revolt in 1775 over the lack of bread. This was not the only poor financial decision old Louis had made, however, as just a year later he would finance the American Revolution. The American Revolution started being financed by France in 1776, and just about anyone can see that financing a whole war while your people starve is kind of ass backwards. Old Louis kept financing and supplying troops until eventually the Americans gained their independence. The ensuing financial ruin, combined with the attention the war brought to the possibility of life without a monarch's rule, led many to believe that it was finally time to topple the old regime. While the French Revolution is often referred to as the Revolution of 1789, one key event occurred 2 years before in 1787. Charles Alexander de Calonne, one absolute lad that was in charge of France's finances, called an assembly of high-ranking notables, the clergy and the bourgeoisie. This was called the Assembly of Notables, and was meant to discuss France's debt problem. Charlie Boy had the radical idea that they could tax the wealthy first and second estates, which was obviously rejected, 'cause duh. Instead, the Assembly of Notables suggested the Convention of the Estates General, which would meet 2 years later in 1789. The meeting of the Estates General, which had not happened since 1614, was a hot mess. They were immediately divided over whether to count votes by head or to give each estate equal votes. This was mainly because the third estate heavily outnumbered the first two. On June 17th, the third estate and some cool cat members of the clergy declared themselves the National Assembly and threatened to proceed without the other two estates. 3 days later, they were locked out of their normal meeting hall, and so they picked the obvious next best place to gather, the King's indoor tennis court. They then took the aptly named tennis court oath and promised not to disperse until France was given a new constitution. On the 9th of July, old Louis urged the other two estates to join the assembly, which now called itself the National Constituent Assembly. This was a foul trick, however, as he was beginning to amass troops to disperse the meeting. The people of Paris were not blind to old Louis's foul trick, however, and a great fear, aptly named the Great Fear, spread throughout the Parisian populace that month. The people were terrified that the aristocracy would overthrow the Third Estate, and decided the logical next step was to storm a hated fortress prison known as the Bastille. The Bastille had long been considered a symbol of royal tyranny and was hated all throughout France. The Bastille was completely destroyed, and its stones were sold on the market because who wouldn't want a piece of that? Sometime between late August and early October, the National Constituent Assembly introduced a knockoff Declaration of Independence called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Old Louis, shocker shocker, refused to sanction it, which resulted in Parisians marching on the Palace of Versailles and forcing the royal family back to Paris. In April of 1792, France declared war on Austria. This kick-started 7 years of war between France and various European powers, because they were kind of just out to get anyone. This was referred to as the French Revolutionary Wars. In late September, a new assembly called the National Convention met to abolish the monarchy and establish a republic. On January 21st, 1793, old Louis went to trial for treason. He was found guilty and was promptly guillotined. In March of 1793, the National Convention set up the Revolutionary Tribunal. In April, the National Convention established the Committee of Public Safety, which became the new de facto wartime government of France. This committee, led by Maximilien Robespierre, oversaw the Reign of Terror, in which 300,000 suspected enemies of the state were arrested, 17,000 were executed, and roughly 10,000 more people died in prison or without trial. This lasted until July of 1794. On July 27, 1794, Robespierre was overthrown by the National Convention, and in an incredibly ironic twist of fate, the next day he was also executed by the method he used to kill many before him, the guillotine. This officially ended the Reign of Terror. The National Convention was then dissolved, and a 5-person directory and a twofold legislature was created. In a Marvel-esque end credits scene, military leader Napoleon Bonaparte overthrew the directory in November of 1799 and declared himself first consul of France. He was later named emperor. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed my video on the French Revolution. There were things I did not include due to time constraints, but I had a lot of fun making this one. I hope you learned something, and if you didn't, I hope I at least made you laugh. Let me know what you'd like to see next in the comments, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.